Hello, and welcome to the stories that brought you here. It's the podcast dedicated to the stories of the people from Pender Island, British Columbia. I am your host, Chris Wakulik, and I'll be sitting down in conversation with current Pender Island residents to hear the stories that brought them to this hardworking little island we live on, and to also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. If this is your first time to the podcast, welcome. If you are a returning listener, it's been a long time. Welcome back. Today, I will be speaking with Linda Wein. Now, if you know Linda, like I know Linda, then you're going to know her as that woman who's been a fixture at the hardware store for close to 30 years now. Linda will talk about her experience as being one of the co-owners of the hardware store for that length of time and her experiences that she's had there. She's also going to talk about growing up on Pender Island in the 50s and 60s. She's going to talk about some local history, such as the Magic Lake Estates development, a little bit about farming, and she's also going to tell us how she and her husband, Don, met back in the day. A great little story. All that and more in this interview. And before we get onto it, I'm just going to mention two things. The first of which is that there's going to be a rather abrupt start to the interview because I was recording while we were having a little bit of a pre-interview conversation and something funny happened that I thought I would include. And secondly, we recorded this on Dawn and Linda's farm. And because of that, there's going to be lots of background noise like cars and trucks driving by, airplanes overhead, and of course that classic Pender sound of a chainsaw running in the distance. So I don't think it takes away too much from the interview. It actually sounds pretty good sound-wise, but you will notice those things, which just adds to the ambiance. Big thanks to Linda for doing the interview. I had a super fun time doing it, and I hope that you enjoy listening to it. We'll see you on the other side of this interview for a wrap-up. But first, a little bit of music before we get started with my interview with Linda Wein.
My brother is always helping us. My cousin helped us. It was all family initially, and then everybody. Oh,
That's
some
okay.
people beep when they go by. It's like saying hi.
That's fantastic.
It is good. It's really nice. I miss the people at the store. That's they were like friends. You know what I mean? And I haven't really worked there much for a year. So I really, really miss the interaction with the people. That's my biggest, that they became like friends, and you get involved in their lives and things like that.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, how many days have you worked at the store for in the last year? Just a handful.
Yeah, just a handful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice that it's nice that people honk.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. If I'm in the field, there's lots of waving and honking going on. So, and that's nice. It's just a way of reconnecting. Some people stop, and if I'm doing the market stand, they'll come by, and that's been really nice too. So say, how are you doing? I haven't seen you, so you get to kind of yell at each other for, a few minutes. It's nice. So anyway.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. That we're on this farm right now and that you purchased the farm and that this goes back deep into your history from what I know from talking to you. But before we get to this location and what it means to you specifically, I guess we can sort of lead into how you came to know of Pender Island and what brought you to Pender Island in the first place.
A boat brought me to Pender Island because my parents lived here, and my grandparents on the Allen side and the Bowerman side all lived here. The Bowermans were early 1900s, and the Allens bought the property in 1940, I think. So, and my mom lived here 90 years, her whole life, up until she moved to a nursing home. She lived on Pender. So, and I had lots of family living around her. Her mom lived here probably till she was in her late 80s as well. So, but anyway, my grandfather, Alan, the Otter Bay property, built boats there. And so I was born in Ganges, and I came home in one of his boats, and it had flags all over it. And it was very cool. I think the first grandchild to be born, and we lived right beside them. So it was very cool. I lived on 3 homes on that property. My dad built one for he and Mom when they got married in 1949. And then we moved down when my grandfather died in about, I think 7. My grandmother moved up to the cottage, and we moved down to their house. And then in 1980, we built a cottage on the property. So I've lived there quite a few years.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, wait. Let's try to pick this apart a little bit here. So
Okay.
your grandfather, who was your grandparents were the first of the ancestors to move to Pender?
On the Allen side, they moved in they bought about 1940. They were in West Vancouver. Both were from Scotland originally, and they met in Vancouver. My grandmother was a couple of years older than my grandfather, and she really was a very strong woman. Like, he was a hard worker, and she kind of, he'd build houses, and she would say, "Oh, I sold the house today. We got to build another one." She was that type of person.
Wow.
And he did. Anyway, they also lived in Australia for 6 or 7 years before my dad was born. And then I think it was 1918, they moved back from Australia. And my grandmother and my uncle, and then they went to the Okanagan. And my grandfather moved back from Australia. He was a builder down there. He also was a musician. He played like a trumpet or something. And he said he made a lot more money playing the trumpet in the roller skating places than he did building, which I thought was very funny. Anyway, but they love Vancouver. But anyway, they moved up to Fintry for a couple of years. The Laird of, what was his name? Anyway, and he built him a speedboat on the lake, on Okanagan Lake, for the use there. They used to have orchards up there, and he also built a lot of the ways that they got the water to the orchards. I can't remember the names of they were wooden
troughs.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, he built this speedboat. So that was kind of neat. And then they moved back to Vancouver, and then my father was born in 1924, and he went to school there. My grandfather built houses and boats. They lived in West Bay, and he used to build a house there and build a boat alongside it. So
really,
my father had some really good memories of that. When he was 15, my grandfather got hired to go to Alaska, take some salesmen up the coast to Alaska. And so my grandfather hired my father to be the cook and whatever. And my father never cooked, so I don't know what they ate going up there. But anyway, there was like a Nestle food salesman and a shoe salesman and somebody else. And they stopped at every community, like all the inlets and everything. So it took them a few weeks to go up there. And then they came down, and the salesmen all got off at Prince Rupert, I think it was. And then Grandpa and Dad just headed home to Vancouver. And yeah.
Cool trip for your dad, because that was probably the first real big travel experience he had.
It was amazing. Yeah. So anyway, so my grandfather I guess he was probably in his 50s or something like that. Came over and they brought everything over to the property in Otter Bay by barge. And this was kind of during the war years. So he had a scow that he used to pull with his boat, and it was a boat he built. These were probably, I think one of the smallest boats was like 28 or 32 feet, and his largest was 42. And anyway, he built the house. He built a boathouse. They built a house for my uncle. It was quite a procedure. There was no road down to the houses from on Pender. It was all, you got there by boat. But Mr. Rowe was beside us, kind of, Roseland. And then there was the salt tree over in Hayashi Cove. So there was a few people around, and, you know, they became, it was a good life. I think they lost one barge with building materials and a donkey to pull things off, and that it turned over in the mouth of the Fraser.
Okay, so they would barge stuff over from Vancouver.
From Vancouver, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what prompted your family to want to move to Pender in those days, like your grandfather?
I think he bought 100 and some acres for back taxes. And he wanted to build boats. And I think the Otter Bay property was kind of the perfect location because it was really protected. And so, yeah, that's what they did. He also built some houses on the island, I think, but more boats. I think he built 6 or 7 boats there, so it's kind of neat. And he met our neighbors. They were from West Vancouver too, and my grandmother had gone in to get a pair of glasses from Dr. Howe, who was an optometrist in West Van, and she said, "My husband built that boat." He had a picture of a boat there, and he said, "Oh." And anyway, they got talking. They became friends, and they actually bought the property beside and became neighbors on Otter Bay. And my grandfather built Dr. Howe a couple of boats, and it was very cool.
That is really cool.
And I became best friends with their granddaughter. The Jervis family is that's the Daphne Howe married Bert Jervis, and so every summer they would come and live all summer beside us. So it was really, really fun that way. We had neighbors.
Yeah, well, when you don't have neighbors to having neighbors, what a huge change, especially if there's like
they were all our ages. There was 2 boys and a girl, so we became, that's what we did all summer. We hung out with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's cool. You have a history of house building and boat building in your family.
On both sides, actually. The Bowerman side, they moved over to Hope Bay in, like I say, the early 1900s. And my grandfather built the house there, the green and white one that's just up from Hope Bay. The Bradleys own it. And the Mance, the one the Neils live in, the blue and white house. And he did quite a few buildings on the island.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really neat. So these houses are still standing today.
Yeah.
Maybe we're gonna get back into like you saying that you were born in Ganges. So for people don't know, that's on Salt Spring, right? And so what can you remember from your first day of being on this earth? Just kidding, Linda. But from what you were told, so you were born in Ganges and then brought back across the water back home, and then you started your life on Pender Island, which is pretty rare. There's not many people I talk to that basically grew up on Pender. You're one of the few. The
Grimmers, I guess Bill Logan, Rod Began, the Amy's girls were my friends, and I went to school with them grade 1 to 8. They moved off when the girls were a bit older for school, and that they had 4 daughters, and my cousins were born here. They were also my best friends because they lived here all the time. And there's quite a few people that still live here that I went to school with, elementary school. Out of a 30 in the elementary school, maybe there was 10 or 12 that are kind of still around.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
those names that you mentioned are all familiar to me. And
Yeah.
I just like, I think I've got to reach out to those people and get to hear their version of events of like what life was like living on Pender. But that's
Yes.
so cool. And it's cool for people listening to this, I'm sure, to recognize that there is that kind of deep history that still exists here. But so what do you remember of like growing up on Pender during those times? Like, what did you guys do for fun? What were some of your hobbies? What was going on? And like, what decade are we talking about here in terms
The
of
50s.
Okay.
I was born in 51.
Okay.
And no kindergarten in school. When I started school, it was one room. It was Mrs. Grimmer. She was a lovely lady. She was a grandma lady, so you felt very comfortable. And she taught 8 grades in one room and did an amazing job. And I remember at the end of grade 1, I got a cow. I won this little ceramic cow, and I had it for years. She gave everybody a prize for being the best student or whatever. It was really fun. But I loved school. I had quite a few different teachers. We had things like soccer if the weather was nice, and everybody would go out and play soccer at lunchtime. Like, you didn't have the proper clothes or everything, but if it was not nice, there was games. Like, we played a lot of chess, checkers, things like that. It was there was probably only 250 people on the island then.
Okay.
There wasn't a lot of jobs and things like that for people, so there was a lot of older people and not that many, like 30 kids in school, so probably, not that many people that were really working on the island. So my parents, they used to do so many things, like the golf course. I remember they were part of the team that the volunteers that built that, and every weekend they'd go there and work on it. And I was kind of bored with that. I just used to hang out. But my dad had, before golf excavating, I guess, he had Allen and Bowerman. So they had dump trucks, and he had a cat and things like that. So I think he did a lot of the probably stuff like that. And then they did a lot of, taking trees down and things like that. They really wanted a golf course on the island. So
And the guys made it happen.
And my dad was always extremely athletic. So a lot of things in our lives involved around, they'd play tennis, and we used to boat in the summer quite a bit, go on picnics. We used to go to Thieves Bay. There was no road down there. And we'd go in, and the trees it was just a beautiful spot. It was so secluded, and we'd take a picnic and go right into the sandy beach and have a picnic there. And we used to do lots of Sunday picnics at Browning Harbor. My uncle Les owned Browning Harbor before it was any buildings there and things like that. So we used to do a lot of family picnics with the Bowermans. Marge and Elmer were same age as my parents, kind of, and like best friends. And they had 2 children, Ted and Sharon, who were kind of the same age as Jim and I, close to it. So we were like always doing things together. That's what you did. If there was a holiday or whatever, we did things with them. So
cool. So when you went to Thieves Bay, would you boat there, or would you
we
walk
boated?
in?
Yeah, just
Okay.
beach it there, jump out. Mom would have made a picnic, and we'd maybe do some swimming and just lay in the sand. There was I remember the trees hanging over the sand, like there. It was kind of just wild and natural, and it was quite amazing. It had lovely sandy beach.
And
to
beautiful
walk in.
sunsets too.
Yeah.
You see, I'm trying to imagine Thieves Bay without a marina as you're saying that. And
yeah.
like, it's nice that there's a marina. People
Yes.
can park their boats there, but
Yeah.
without, I'm picturing it. I'm like, this place looks beautiful. This place looks even more beautiful than it does now.
Yeah.
With all these boats in the water, right?
It was paradise. It was really amazing. My Uncle S also was involved in all the properties in Magic Lake too. He owned a lot of property on the island, and he used to have a farm, like Highland cattle, out where the lake is. Magic Lake was his farm. My mom and Aunt Marge used to garden out there, so we'd also do that a lot, spend a lot of time out. They had a huge, beautiful garden out there, fenced, and he had his Highland cattle.
So what side of Magic Lake was that on? Like what?
It's right where Magic Lake is now.
Oh, of course, because it used to be called...
They flooded the lake. It was not a lake there. It was a fields.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for people listening and for myself to get clear on this story as well, too, because I've been told it used to be called Dead Cow Slough. That was
that
nickname.
Could have been after. It could have been wet, but I remember, I don't exactly know where the cows were and where the garden was, but because the roads changed so much, but it was right beside the road at that point. And there was nothing much out there, right? I think you can almost divide Pender life into pre-Magic Lake estates and post-Magic Lake estates, because it did change the island, the economy, my dad had probably one of the only cats on the island. There might have like caterpillars, like bulldozers.
Sure, yeah.
And he put in driveways. He was busy for, I think, from the 1950s to he sold in 76, I think, to Doug Keating and Glenn Grimmer. And so that was, he just did driveways. And where our store is on Port Wash Road, that was a gravel pit. And he used to get all his materials out of there.
Okay.
And
well, but before we venture, I'm so curious about Magic Lake because they flooded it, and so that was because they were creating the subdivision that is Magic Lake.
Yes,
and so that was part of the appeal for bringing people. And look, we have this beautiful lake here, and they created that.
Yes, so I think they had lots of waterfront. It was, I think, around 1,500 lots. It was the biggest subdivision in BC, and they used to fly people over, and if you were interested in buying a lot, and that's how they developed it.
Do you remember how you felt about that situation? Like, because having a man-made lake just appear one day, basically, I guess that's kind of what happened. I'm sure you knew it was coming. I
can't really remember the time when but it probably was quite wet area to begin with.
Yeah.
So they probably decided that was a good use for it. But yeah, I think it would have been a very different island had that not happened. And I think the good part about Magic Lake is it's given a lot of young people, because there's so many cottages there and smaller like starter homes now for young people. So I think that was the good news. And the island's big enough. Like, I can't see exactly what they would have done with it had it been just big pieces of land. Like, a lot of that land was not farmable, not, it just would have sat. They logged things. And then after that, there wasn't a lot of income jobs, things like that. And basically it's, it was quite sparse that way for jobs. There was the Hope Bay. When I was growing up, there was Hope Bay and Port Wash, and there was 2 stores, 2 halls, 2 churches. And because I was related to the Bowermans, and my grandmother lived in Hope Bay, my mom worked for Mr. Corbett at the Corbett store many, many years. And my aunt had been a Corbett and that. So we usually went to the Hope Bay, but it was totally, and I didn't really know all that many of the Port Washington people very well.
Okay.
It was very distinct. I went to the United Church, and a lot of them were at the Anglican Church. It was really a very unique situation. to have the island almost, there was only one school, which was good. So
there was a division that existed on the island that
Yeah.
didn't necessarily, there weren't two opposing sides to each other, but maybe
No.
geographically.
But it wasn't that far. Like the halls were identical.
They're identical.
Identical. One was by Port Wash store and one was by Hope Bay store.
Okay.
And yeah, they both had stages and then an area and they were both used, but I think it was more maybe religious, like the Anglican people settled on one side and the United Church people settled more on the other side. And we had two docks. We had Hope Bay and Port Washington.
Yeah.
Right? It was really different.
This is so interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard this aspect of Pender history before, but I don't know why, but the idea of two identical halls as well too sticks in my mind. But what would happen at those halls? Like dances, obviously.
Weddings, dances, badminton, maybe even like a birthday party. There was no community hall, and probably there was 250 people on the island, and a hall the parking was always really bad, but they say New Year's Eve celebrations, things like that, anything that you wanted a gathering, because people's houses weren't that big. It was just, you could rent the hall, and I think it had a little kitchen. And when my mom was married, I think, and that was 1949, the ladies at the Corbett store all put on a spread for the wedding. They got married at the community church, and then they went and had something at the hall.
And so just to jump in, the Corbett store, that's where Hope Bay
Bay, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. That was, that's been there for a long, long time. So had the Port Washington one. And I think they both had post offices too. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And they're pretty close to each other, like you say. They're not that far apart.
My mom used to say that, I think it was when Mr. Bridge owned the Port Washington store, he used to have a spin the wheel night. I think it was Christmas Eve, and the whole island used to go to that. And you bought tickets.
Yeah.
And then he'd spin this wheel, and he'd have things that you were betting on. And that was a really fun way that they got together. But other than that, we didn't go that much to the Port Wash store. It was funny, and they were really similar.
Okay, well, was it you get used to going to one place? Like your mom works there for crying out loud.
Mom always checked on my grandmother, and she was really, and she'd worked at the other store. I worked at the Corbett store later on. For the Smiths, it was called Smith Brothers store, and
So when you were going from your house near Otter Bay and then going to Hope Bay and various other islands, would you walk most of the time or bike, or what was your main mode of transportation when you were a kid?
Sometimes Mom would drive us, but we walked quite a bit. We had bikes. Our property was it's a long downhill, so it was always really hard to push your bike.
Of course.
Up that hill, and we never could ride it. They were big, old, heavy bikes, but anyway, we did. When I was probably old enough to go out, we had a rowboat that we were allowed to go all around the bay in, and I used to row over to Roseland every day in the summer. We used to play over there because there was always a group that came there for the summer, and the Jervis kids next door, they had a rowboat, so we'd go over and we'd buy Mr. Popsicles from Mr. Rowe and Mrs. Rowe and hang out at Roseland quite often.
Nice.
Too. So we had boat transportation and a little dinghy that my grandfather built, and that was really fun too.
Well,
Spent lots of
two
time.
things I've heard in the past that just going for a row from various places on the island was just what people did. People jumped in a rowboat and went quite like long distances because that's what you did, right? But even as a kid, you used that as like a mode of transportation, short distances.
Yeah. My mom used to call us back for lunch. She had an old ship's bell off one of the boats, and we could hear it over at Roseland. And then we'd run down to the dock and row home. And
Nice. And to give context to people about Roseland as well, too, and maybe myself as well, is that there was a resort there?
yes, it was cabins, and most people booked it for July and August. They'd leave maybe, I think, Vancouver, most of the people came from. There was probably 12 to 15 and cottages, and they had like kind of small kitchen, like a living room area, maybe 2 bedrooms and a very small bathroom. So it was really, I think a lot of the kids swam in the ocean instead of, showering and bathing, and but the moms, it was a really nice little community. You got to know the kids. The same kids would come year after year.
So would people stay for the full 2 months? Or
Yep.
Wow, really?
I think that was, when I was growing up, that was the common way of using it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. When people come to the island now, tourists, like I hear so often from people that they just love this island. They love coming here. It's like it really means a lot to them, right? And that do you remember that same sentiment? If people were coming here for 2 months and staying, they came here because they enjoyed it, right? But do you remember that at all, or is that something that that there was like great affinity for people coming over and visiting the island?
I think because you did so much walking and playing and swimming and boating. Most of them had some boat that they could use, or when we were older, a bit of water skiing. But I remember one girl, her name was Harriet Hall, and they were from West Van, I think. And I think they had 4 kids in the family. Anyway, they all used to come over, and she was very athletic and that. But once a week, we'd walk to Hope Bay. And she used to have theme walks, like we'd dress up and it's quite a hike from Roseland to Hope Bay.
Yeah.
And then we'd always take some money for candy. The Ochterlony sisters.
Whoa, hold on. Wait, what kind of theme walks would you have? What do you mean by
we'd
theme
dress
walks?
up. We'd do like clowns, we didn't have, it would just be some kind of theme
to the walk. But so clowns
or whatever, like Halloween kind of stuff. I can remember some, or maybe not. Maybe sometimes we just walk there, but there'd be quite a few of us, and we do it once a week. Take our allowance and walk down. And I remember I used to buy orange floats from the Ochterlony ladies that were right by Hope Bay store.
Yep.
And in their living room they had like a little soda parlor and they'd make floats. I think they were like 15 cents and they were so delicious. So after walking all the way there, you'd have ice cream and orange crush floats, and then you'd walk home. It was one of those memories. Anyway, Harriet.
But the little like homemade like parades like once a week that they'd come up with an idea.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
That was
that
Harriet's
idea.
thing, and we'd walk with sticks, or I don't know. She was very creative and a real organizer. So
nice. And
we just
sorry,
followed
just
along.
to interject, it was fun because you just mentioned the Ochterlony ladies, and
Yes.
I interviewed Connie Ochterlony.
Yes.
And she talked a little bit about that store.
Yes.
And so it's just the house that's just up from Hope Bay, and anyway.
They lived there, and then you just went into their house, and they had like this kind of little table-y thing that
Okay.
it was very cool.
Yeah, and great orange floats.
Oh, delicious. The best.
Okay, so you're living on Pender Island in the Otter Bay area, and anyways, you're interacting with people during the summertime. You've got a robust friendship going on with various people like on the island during that time, and people coming to visit during the summertime. And so when you became a teenager, what were your thoughts about? Did you want to stay on Pender? Did you want to get off Pender? And then what wound up happening?
I went to the dormitory for grade 9
I'm sorry, the dormitory?
on Salt Spring.
Okay.
So they turned the hospital that I was born in into a dormitory for the school, and that was high school. And I went there the start of grade 9. I was the only girl from Pender. I might have been the only child that year that went, because the Amy's had moved up to the Okanagan, and there wasn't a lot of kids my age there. So there was maybe 30 kids from all the islands in the dormitory. And the first day I was there was when I met Don. He was living on Main Island, and he'd been sent over there to school. And anyway, I knew quite a few of the kids, but that was the next Monday through Friday for the next grade 9, 10, 11, and 12, 4 years of my life. And I made lots of good friends from other islands, and I really enjoyed that. The actual school where you change classes and it was good. I really liked that.
Yeah, because I guess it opened you up to meeting a whole bunch of different people and actually having a little bit more of a structure to it rather than one teacher teaching grades 1 through 8, like you mentioned before, right?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot on Pender at that time in our lives. Like there was, like I said, there was maybe 30 kids in the last few years. The school had 2 classrooms. Actually, I think it was in grade 2 they split it, and we got 2 teachers. But there still wasn't a huge amount of kids on the island. So there wasn't a lot to do. The summers were really exciting. The winters, you did things, family things and that. But I read a lot. I kind of liked my peace and quiet. And so I didn't really mind that. But in the summers, you made up for it. You went. It was go, go, go every day.
Sure.
So that was fun. Yeah.
So you go to school in Salt Spring, and you're open up to different people and experiences. What were you thinking at that time? Is like, this is what I want to do with my life. This is the direction I want to go. Or did you have those thoughts, or you didn't quite know until after
I
grade
was
12?
really scared to go. I was very I'd never gone many places. We didn't do a lot of traveling. My dad was fire chief for a few years, and he didn't leave the island in the summer. We had a huge fire on Pender right on our property where recycling is now. That whole hillside went up, and it was very scary. So I think that triggered the fire department, and they just were too afraid to leave in the summer. And we enjoyed the island in the summer anyway, but yeah, I can't really remember thinking what I was going to do. I liked the school. I enjoyed meeting people. I had some really good friends. I didn't think that far ahead, I don't think.
Fair enough. Well, and then subsequently, that's hilarious. One of my questions, I was like, I got to ask Linda, how did you meet Don? So your husband. But you met him your first day.
First day.
Grade 9.
We didn't get to know each other all that well the first year, but he became my cousin's kind of best friend, Ted. Okay. And so I kind of got to know him that way, and in school and in the dorm, we had quite a routine in the dorm. Like you had to do a lot of the cleaning and the make lunches and help with dinners. And so you got rotated, sweep and that. So you had to do things with other people, and quite often you got to know people. So you might not be friends with them, but you got to know them by doing your chores together. So I think there was some of that
Okay.
And
So what happened? What happened after high school? After you finished grade 12, what happened next?
I went to UVic for a year, and then Dawn, we'd gone together. I think since I was 16, and he was in Vancouver and I was in Victoria, and I was in love, and so we just decided we'd get married.
Okay.
And we did.
Right on. So
on Pender.
Okay, well, let's hear about that.
Yeah.
What you got married on Pender? Where did that happen?
At the church that moved, at the Anglican church, because the United Church was closed then. And my mother had always been involved in the United Church, but there was no ministers, basically it was just kind of shut down because there was so few people to work at it. So I got married at the Anglican church.
Yeah.
And then we had a reception in Mom and Dad's at the property, and then we flew away and lived in Vancouver for probably, I don't know, half a year or something. And then we moved to Victoria after that. So I spent probably most of our time raising our kids in Victoria. A few years in Abbotsford thrown in there, but yeah.
Okay. So Dawn and Linda are starting their lives off together and having some kids.
Very naive. Yeah.
Very naive. Well,
we grew up together. Absolutely. I wouldn't do it any other way.
All right, let's hear it for being naive. I think we're all that way in our early 20s.
Yeah.
And maybe the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Who knows? But anyway, so you start your life off and you're living in Victoria for the most part. And you're raising the kids, and then Dawn's working. And what's happening during those years? And I guess we're talking about the late 60s, early 70s?
No, I graduated in 1969, so it was the 70s.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. With 3 little kids, we had a business, and I went back to school and did a business program at Camosun, and we just had very busy lives. Dawn had 2 or 3 careers, and in, I think it was 1981, we kept coming over to Pender and visiting my parents, and we had three little kids. And they had such busy lives, too. They were playing tennis and golf and involved in tournaments and doing so many things. My dad had retired from the bulldozing trucking business, but he had bought a sawmill and was doing quite a bit of that between retirement and, he could physically do it. So we came over and I said, I think we're going to look for a place to buy over here so we don't end up on your doorstep every weekend with 3 little kids. And, and he said to me, go pick a place on the property that you want to build and I'll do the paperwork. I'll get it started.
Wow.
And so I did. And then there was probably half a dozen trees that had to come down. And he felled them and milled them, and we built our cottage out of the
trees from the property.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It
was very cool.
Totally cool.
Very cool.
I don't think that happens very often today. Right?
It doesn't. And you could then. It was totally, it was all legal. We're an outbuilding. It's a big piece of property, but it's very unusual to have that kind of, there was a building inspector on the island. It was all done above board. But
it's okay. It was 40 years ago. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
40 years ago. Yeah.
But and this was a place to visit on the weekends, or this was actually a home to start?
It was 600. It was like kind of a 900 square foot house, 600 with down on the main level and 300-foot loft, and like a lot of them on the island. But we loved it. We came for many years, and until in 1992, my parents were in Mexico, and Dawn's one of the people from Main Island owned the lumber yard and was selling it, and Dawn said, "I'd like to buy the lumber yard on Pender." So he said, you don't have to work there. You can just, play tennis and have fun and 2 of our kids were out of the house, and just Debbie she was 14. And so we thought, no, we can move into the cottage. So that's half the problem solved. And we sold our home in Victoria and bought the lumber yard. And then I worked 28 years. So much for playing tennis. Never played tennis after moving to...
Are you kidding? Really?
Almost never.
Oh, my gosh.
Almost never.
Did you play a lot of tennis before, though?
Yeah, I played at the racket club. I had a friends, and I used to play quite a bit.
This is a tragedy. Dawn said you were going to get to play tennis.
I know. But my kids did, and my parents did, and I mean the odd time we would. But I was so tired after working 5 or 6 days a week and then having things to do.
Well, no kidding.
It was, we boated a bit over here, but tennis was out. And my dad had built a tennis court on the property, right?
There was a tennis court on the property.
In front of our house is a tennis court.
I'm feeling for you, Linda.
I know.
Seriously. As someone who loves playing tennis.
Donna used it. The kids used it. Anyway.
Okay, and so it begins, the hardware store chapter to this story, which so many people know you by. It's like, of course, probably like everybody does. It's like Linda from the hardware store. So, 1992, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so maybe walk us through what was going on in that first year of purchasing the hardware store, and what do you remember from those first couple of years, maybe?
Oh, well, Debbie had to go to Salt Spring, but she didn't board there. It was the water taxi then. Yeah. She was 14. So, and she did it. It was really early. We had to leave the house. I think they picked them up about 7 a.m. And when we bought the hardware store, most of the trucks were really old, and I remember our driveway is fairly challenging, and sometimes we'd leave, and if it had snowed at all, and there were some winter mornings, we'd hit a few trees going up the driveway in this old truck. But we didn't really have much of a fence at the store, and keys were left in trucks. People could hop the fence literally and leave us a note. I took some 2x4s, or it was a very, very different, very casual.
Yeah.
I do remember they'd always stop for a beer after work. And then finally Dawn said, I don't think this is a good idea, because it was hard to draw the line between, what was social and what, if they had a couple beers and then they were driving home, not a good idea. So we gradually went away from that and changed the mentality a little bit about things like that. It was, we got different staff, a few more rules and regulations, as we felt it was a safety issue and both for the business and for the people.
It makes sense. During that time, everything was changing. You know? I can remember in the 80s, I lived in Burnaby. I grew up there, and my parents helping to push a car out of the ditch because there's a couple of guys drinking and driving.
Yeah.
And they went into just like, I guess we better push them out so I can keep going on their way, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what was going on in the 80s.
Yeah.
I think there's a little more awareness in the 90s.
Yes.
So you're just with the times there, right?
Yeah. So, we made some changes. Dawn really stepped up, and we were so tired at night. I remember going home just absolutely. The house was small, and thinking, I don't even want a bigger house. This is just fine. I just want to sleep. But we put a lot, but we loved it. The people on the island were so amazing and helpful, and it's been a really good thing. We did it as a 5-year project, and it's still ongoing. We didn't think our older, like Donnie was at UVic doing business. He was never going to move over here. And then lo and behold, about 1998, maybe, he decided, he did a bit of an apprenticeship with us through UVic and that, and kind of decided it was an okay place to to live. And then Debbie she did grade 9, 10, and 11 at Salt Spring. And she used to come back from school. The water taxi would drop her off at the store and we'd put her to work. Or she could go home and make dinner. It was her choice. It was a lot of hard work, but very rewarding in so many ways. And we had such good customers and contractors and things that, like Brent and Steve and my cousin Ted was on the island, and Bill. And if you needed to know something, you could ask somebody. Jim Dunlop. There's too many to name that were just wonderful to work with, and they kind of helped us along. So, yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting that you mentioned Donnie, your oldest son. So he becomes part of the family business.
Yeah.
Like a number of years into it, because it wasn't a home hardware when it
when we started off, it was kind of with Pro Hardware, and it was actually Donnie that said, this doesn't make sense. The Pro Hardware had different presidents, they were a co-op. No, not a co-op. It was a private company, and you just bought things through them. And yes, they couldn't quite fit us into any of their banners. But anyway, Home Hardware came over, and they just had a really good program. And so in about 1999, I think we started going with them. We changed the store. ProHead was having some rough times. I don't even know if they're around anymore, but we just decided that, and I'm really glad we changed. It was the best thing we ever did. It made so much more sense than how we were doing it before. So, yeah.
Because
getting things here is huge. Yeah.
For shipping over lumber?
Ship everything.
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 Okay.
Everything that we put in the store has to come by truck, right? And we've usually handled it. So when Debbie was young, her dad said, I'll buy you a truck, but you never come over to the island with it empty. You always have to pick up something.
Yeah.
And she did. And so did Darcy and Donnie too. That was just part of it. It's like, what do you need? I'll get it, because it was so difficult to get things over, like,
yeah,
especially the hardware part. Even now, every box has to be moved from a trailer to our truck and then into the warehouse. Most stores, a truck comes and they unload the stuff there, and yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the expense too of going across the water that other stores.
Yeah, it's just all very labor intensive, and then in our store, it's also a challenge where you can put it. As you probably remember.
Yeah, for sure. There's a limited amount of space in there.
It's very crowded. Yes. So anyway.
So, okay, you switch over to becoming a Home Hardware in the late 90s, and then slowly you're bringing in your children into the mix here, and there you go. But, it's very interesting to me just what a hub the hardware store is. And for people who live here, obviously they know, right? For people who don't, it's a place where you run into people a lot, like a lot of conversations happen. It's a very chit-chatty kind of place. And it's so vital to the community. But, something that I've been thinking about is that what has the hardware store meant to you over the last 28 years in terms of your experience of being behind the counter and interacting with the community, and like what has that meant to you?
My mom always used to say, I can't believe I've lived here my whole life and I hardly know anybody anymore. And she said, and you know everybody. And I think I am a people person. Like, I like people. I like to, and I think I just got to know a lot of people. It's just a feel good thing. I think, if you can help somebody with something that they need or want or whatever, I also would ask people questions if there was something I wasn't sure of, and that was really rewarding. I like to learn. I like to learn new things, and so I think the friendships, and a lot of people, we didn't do a huge amount out of the family. Like, we weren't partiers, we weren't, but I felt like I had lots of friends, and they're customers, but they're friends too. That was really probably the thing I liked the best, was the people, and the people we worked with, and working with our family too. It's kind of a neat experience. It's hard to draw the lines sometimes when you go home between work and that, but Debbie and I still talk all the time about plants, and all the kids phone us up if they've got a question. Donnie and Dawn still plan huge amount of the trucking. They're always brainstorming. Where do you get this? How do you get it here? How would you load the truck with this stuff? And Dawn still drives the truck sometimes, which is pretty amazing. But anyway, you just get to know people.
Yeah, totally. Because, Todd, your son-in-law, who works at the hardware store, he mentioned this to me one time, that when somebody's new to the island, it's always obvious that it's like on a weekend, and they're usually buying like a scrub brush of some kind, cleaning supplies, and they just purchased a place, and it's like, oh, you've never seen this person before, and they've got all the tools that you've seen numerous times. It's like, oh, clearly you're new to the island. Hello,
welcome.
Right? And so you guys are sort of the beginning of people's interaction with community members, because you're the hardware store owners, and that's where people first go generally.
Yep.
When they move to the island. But then on top of that, you have people building homes, and then they're coming in on a regular basis, and so you're keeping up with the progress of the building of the homes and getting to see them a couple times a week, sometimes every day, right?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
so it's interesting how the friendships develop, because you're only seeing people for a brief period of time, but it's kind of like sometimes pivotal moments in people's lives where it's like, I got this project and I don't know what to do, and I need some advice and things like that. But I've always got the sense from you, seeing how you interact with customers, that you're always genuinely concerned about how things are going for them in their experience that they're having through what they're doing in their home through the building projects. And it's cool. Of course that you're gonna build some really unique and lasting friendships that way.
Yeah, that's why people honk sometimes when I'm in the garden.
Yeah,
but I can't tell you how many times I've said to people, you must be new to the island, just on what you were saying. And they quite often would say, yes, I just got off the ferry and the moving truck is arriving tomorrow. And I'd always say, well, welcome to the island. I hope you enjoy it, kind of thing. And we've had some amazing people on the island. I think absolutely amazing. And such a variety in the 29 years that we've been here. It's really mind-boggling, some of the different backgrounds and just really nice, down-to-earth people. So yeah,
it's true. It's true. Like, I think being in a small community, like, you have to be down to earth, right? I've been thinking about this a little bit, because there's a lot of new people that have been moving here the last year or so, and I think that, I don't know what it is about the frequency of the island, or if it's being in a small community, that things sort of flow and move a certain way on the island, and that I think that it's drastically different in the city, obviously, but it's inevitable that, like, you're gonna have to sort of slow your rhythm down a little bit being on the island, and then get down to earth, because that's kind of what it's about, being in this very small island that we exist in this community. And yeah, I think it's really beautiful. And this is like part of the reason for doing the podcast too, is so getting to hear people express themselves and getting to know, like, I'm just kind of rambling here. I might edit this out, but it is a super beautiful thing that people are down to earth here. Anyway, and yeah, I'm really appreciating this interview. By the way, this is
great.
super fun.
Great.
Right? But sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know exactly when it was, but all of a sudden the young people started coming, and I think that's so healthy for a community because of the smaller homes, and there's jobs, like there's a lot of construction jobs that people can make a good living, I think, and things like Poets Cove and that. I mean, you need places for people to work. Like, people used to retire here, and now people come to live here, and I think that's good for the community to have that energy and things like that, you know, you can make a living and raise a family, and like the school is awesome. I think I had four of my grandchildren were in it 1 year, so I was kind of involved with it, and I was just blown away by how wonderful the school is on the island. You know, they even come up to the farm, and they have a remote classroom. They haven't used it much with COVID, but normally a couple of the classes come and do things. They built a disc golf course, and they had outdoor classrooms, and they learned things. And I think that's really taking advantage of the island, of, you know, just seeing different aspects of it that you'd never get that in the city. So
Totally.
Yeah.
And actually, let's shift gears, because you mentioned the farm, which is where we are right now, and let's talk about that for a bit. So where are we exactly? What farm are you speaking of?
Well, it's called Valley Home Farms, and we bought it 7 years ago. And when I was growing up, I wasn't allowed on the farm. There wasn't really a lot of kids my age here. There were most of the people living here were older, but there was a lot of draft dodgers that lived on the farm.
Oh, really?
And so I didn't really necessarily want to come here, but I didn't, you know, but I always loved seeing the cows. It's very central to the island, right? So, I think I've always wanted to be a farmer. And Don and I work well together, and he was kind of gung-ho. He's really good with machinery, and usually anything I want involves a whole lot of work for him. But anyway, this was kind of like a way to transition away from the store, and we were hoping to kind of do something good for the community, have it, you know, clean it up a bit. It had been kind of in disrepair, so we fix up the houses a bit, and we've got some cows and goats. I love animals, so I love taking care of them, and I like growing. I've now got 3 big greenhouses, so yeah, it's kind of like a passionate thing. We're getting a little too old to be doing everything, but Barb and Glenn Grimmer, and they usually cut the hay, which is awesome, and we take whatever we need for our animals, and they take the rest. And so it's been good. The community garden is, Corin and Nancy are doing something in Field 1, the big field, this year with saving seeds, and they're going to do some things for the community again. And I would like to see it move. Well, the trail has been awesome. The map people moving around Pender put the trail there, and we helped some with that. They were amazing, and the trail is really well used. So, and every time I see somebody walking on it, I think, oh, this is so special, because they get to enjoy the farm. They're safe from the traffic, and I think it's just a wonderful way to go, and we get people walking their dogs here every day and things like that. It's very cool. And you never run out of projects to do. We have so much work that we'd like to do here, and a limited energy. So it's kind of like, I'm hoping one of my grandchildren or children want to do more someday, but they're all too busy right now. So we'll see. we'll see what. In the meantime, we camp down by the community hall. It's called Camp Cowbell, and we have a trailer, and sometimes we can have family gatherings there and be distanced. We have our own little trailers and things, and that's really fun too. That's my grandsons love that. They bike and play, and it's a good chance for some downtime on the farm. So anyway,
you spend a lot of time here.
I spend, yes, we're here every day a few times. And our grandson is living here, and he's online school at Camosun, so he's staying up in our office right now and helps if the goats get out or the fencing and the heavy stuff. Yeah, it's wonderful to have Hayden here. And Hillary helped me all last year in the gardens and in the greenhouse. And Austin and Ethan are just getting old enough to do things at the farm too with us. They'll come over and do some stuff. So.
And just to backtrack a little bit in the history of the farm, and I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, but it was originally called
Valley Home Farms, and Albert Menzies bought it from the Grimmers, maybe, or maybe Rutherford Hope. I'm not sure. There was, anyway, and it was the McDonald farm across the street. The cemetery property was part of it. The original house was down at the kind of the northerly end, and there was a big barn which collapsed. It's still collapsed up there.
It looks wonderful. I love the look of a collapsed barn.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah. It was a really well-known dairy farm, and they used to ship butter and cream and things like that off the island. Albert Menzies was really hardworking, had quite a few children, and he got the dock built at Hope Bay because it would save, well, it was a good thing for the island, I think, at that time. But it really helped him with his cream and butter and milk and things because it was a lot easier to get it to Hope Bay than Port Washington. So, and he was very involved in the Hope Bay part of island life, the church. And he used to grow, he cleared the land. He had award-winning Jersey cows. He'd plant a field of turnips. He'd hay with a scythe. His son, Victor, took over from him, and the elderly parents moved down to Hope Bay. They were neighbors of my grandmother's, and Victor, I used to know Victor and Vivian, and they lived down Hope Bay Bible Camp was their property after they sold the farm. And so I actually knew the son that worked for many, many years on the farm. And so there was a little connection there, but they must have worked so hard to keep it going and the clearing and we have tractors and things, and they had wagons and horses and, stone barges and their hands and their so then it was Ross Smith. They sold to the Ross Smiths, and then I wanted to come up with a name, and it is in a valley, and I knew the Menzies, and so I said, well, I'd kind of like to change the name to Valley Home Farms because that's who kind of started it, and yeah. So one of these days I'm going to have a sign and out front, but anyway, I'm hoping sometime that we can have some younger people actually farming. That would be my goal for it.
Right on. Well, I think it's so cool that you used the original name when you were coming up with a new name, going back to the past.
Yes.
And honoring that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
It's great. And it's a great vibe here. And, something that I just reminded myself of was that make sure that you ask Linda about the recycling and center.
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
You mentioned that your father was the fire chief This was something I found out a few years ago, and I didn't know this until then, that property came into existence because of your family. And I just wanted to make sure that story was mentioned, because I think it's very, very important that we kind of understand why things are the way they are on the island, and that's something I aim to do. But could you give a little bit of background about the recycling center property?
Sure. Well, when my dad sold his equipment to Doug and Glenn, he decided that he bought the mill. He decided that some warehouses would be good, and I guess got the property zoned industrial by the recycling and that section. It was already kind of grandfathered because he had where Gulf Excavating used to be. They had equipment there and things. So anyway, so he built the warehouses. He milled all the lumber and had various contractors build them. And Andy Nowak came to him and said, "You've got a piece of property there, and I'd like to do a recycling center. I think we really need one on the island." And Dad was always very generous with his time and, whatever he could do for people. He was always helping people do things. That's just the kind of person that both my parents were. So he said, "Oh, I think that sounds like a good thing." He was really supportive of the idea. And he said, "Well, there's a problem, though. We have no money." And so Dad thought about it for a few minutes, and he said, "Well, how does $1 a year sound as rent?" So that's how they got and then eventually one of the people on the recycling board, I think, died and left them some money. And they actually, I believe it was Ted Scholes was involved in that time. And they said, "Could we buy, this person's left this much money, could we buy the recycling center with it?" And Dad said, "Yep, but I don't want to do any paperwork. You guys do all the paperwork and whatever you can kind of afford." And so that was a done deal. Yeah, and they were always really pleased. And Andy always came, usually at Christmas or something, and they always went and had a visit with my parents and talked about it, and it was very very special. Mary would make something for them, and they always appreciated that very much. It was like the personal thank you again for making this happen. So yeah.
Right on. Fantastic. And that's great. Like that, I think that there's a history of donated land on the island that exists. And we drive by things and we don't really understand the history or how they came into existence. But thank you for sharing that. And for people who are interested, there's an interview I did with Andy Novak, who Linda just mentioned. I think it's episode 27 off the top of my head. But if you want to know more about the history of the recycling center, he goes deep into that as well. But it's a pretty great thing that lands are allocated and donated, and situations like that happen. Yeah. So it's great. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna start winding it down now, but we're not quite done. But to get to something I mentioned before we started the interview, I said that I would ask a question of, okay, who outside of your family has helped you along the way? And that's a question I ask for people who are listening, to show the connections that exist on the island between community members. But through your years of living on Pender, like whether it be people who are here now or who are deceased, who can you remember who kind of has given you help along the way on Pender?
Oh, well, because we have such a big family and spread out, that the family was definitely the first. And then we got into the contractors were so helpful, and there's so many of them. Some have come and gone, but Brent, Steve, just too many to mention. Brent used to come into the store, and I'd ask him a question. He'd help with plumbing if there was nobody around. He is a people person too.
Sorry, Brent Marsden.
Brent Marsden.
Okay, yeah.
And he was just a savior. He always took time to chat with somebody or help. Anyway, and he was really good with our kids too. Anyway, definitely that. Win Powell used to do our books, and he was always giving us good advice. I mean, he'd come every Saturday after running London Drugs and would come in and he'd say, you should move this because it shouldn't be there. And you better move it before he came in the next Saturday, or he'd say, that's still in the wrong place. So he gave us good advice, support. He was amazing. Shelley White, who passed away, she was, well, our staff. We had so many really good staff. Shelley was with us so many years until she got very sick. But she always gave so much of herself. And let me see, who else? There's so many people. Too many to mention, I think, honestly.
There always is, Linda. There always is.
And I worry about missing somebody who had a huge part in it. But
I'm almost ready to extract this question out because it seems like most people struggle. It's like, there's so many, I'm going to forget. And
I know.
Whatever. But the people that you did mention, at first you mentioned Brent and then Steve, but you didn't mention Steve's last name, which...
Steve Wright.
Steve Wright, okay.
Steve and Brent were in partnership, and there was Salish Construction, South Island. I was just trying to think of the ones, Wayne Cartwright and Jim Dunlop, I said before, and the original ones there that were just, they just take the time and because Don had done some building. He was kind of in his element, but out of his element too, in a lot of ways. And things change. The building supply, Tim and Chris and people like that who come and say they're changing things. You need to get, this into the store. Certainly, all our reps and things, the home hardware people used to come and help us as well. Not necessarily on island, but some had island connections.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's
too many to mention.
Well, I appreciate you trying.
Name.
I've noticed, like I said earlier, it's kind of tough because I want this to sort of show the connections that exist, but I don't want people to feel uncomfortable. Be like, it's like I'm leaving people out. But thank you, I appreciate that. Before we get to the finish line here, just is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to mention? Something that you want to put down for the record here?
Not particularly. I think I'm going to think of all kinds of things at 2 a.m. But no, I think I was really fortunate growing up here, and we were raised to help people, to help the community, and I think it's just been a really nice kind of a, not legacy, but I remember so many things. People used to get together, like building the community hall. That happened in 2000, but they used to do that all the time when I was younger. It's a really neat way to barn raising things. My grandmother's house was built with family coming over, and they did it in like a couple of weekends, things like that. I think that's really important. And I see lots of it happening with the young people, getting together, helping each other out. Even the modern, like, people go on Facebook and that and help each other out. When our goats get out, we hear through Facebook. And I'm not a big electronic person, but I think it has its really good points, and especially now where you have to distance a bit. I think there's still a pretty good community feel with Island, and certainly there's, when I was growing up here, probably 250 people, so 20 times the population in the summer, or 10 times the population anyway now, and a lot more amenities on the island. But we did okay then. It was good. It was good, peaceful life, I think.
I like what you
Yeah.
say about helping out in situations that require a lot of hands, because the mentality these days is that you pay somebody to do things and then that's how it gets done, right? And I'm hearing stories from people who are a little bit older than I am and have had different life experiences, especially on Pender, and they talked about community involvement in situations just like that, right? Like somebody's barn needed to be raised, and the community hall was a huge compilation
Yes.
of people getting together for
Yeah.
that, and that would be really amazing to help bring an element of that back together. But I guess we just have to take that into our own hands. And
I was talking to my friend Nan Campbell, who was from Saturna, and she said they had a lot of people move over in the winter, and then power outages, and they don't know what to do. They say, well, where do you go in an emergency? And her sister lives there all the time. They have a big farm over there, and they said, well, basically you have to be pretty self-sufficient, because don't wait until a disaster. Be prepared. You're in a kind of remote community. If the ferries can't sail someday or the whatever, you really need to be a little bit more self-sufficient here. Power does go out, and it might go out for a couple of days. And don't wait for somebody to do things for you. Do it yourself. If it needs doing, do it.
yeah, that's
So-
maybe a good reminder. When you meet people, it's like, hey, you're new to the island. Have
Yes.
you ever thought about a generator? 'Cause
Yeah.
that might come really in handy. Yeah, because it sucks. It sucks being cold if you don't have a wood stove, which
Yes.
my
Yeah.
wife and I are in that circumstance, right?
Yes.
And it's nice to know people, and it's nice to know like how to take care of things yourself as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
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 Well, Linda, I think we've reached the end.
Good.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
I'm
Oh.
so thankful for this. Really.
I'm sure there's a lot of things I should have brought up, but anyway,
It was perfect. You brought
was-
up all the things that you should have brought up. It was wonderful. Job well done.
Anyway, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Linda again so much for that interview. And to honor that interview, I decided I'd come down to Thieves Bay. So Thieves Bay is on the North Island, and it is a popular marina. And there's a lot of boats here. And the reason I came down here is because Linda mentioned it in the interview, and having picnics here. So I'm here imagining what it was like without the breakwater that I'm actually sitting on right now, and all these boats in behind me, and the idea of coming around the corner here in a rowboat and heading on in to the grassy field that exists there now, and having a nice picnic in the 50s and 60s. I love how Linda described it as being magical, because it provided me an opportunity to reimagine this spot. I've only ever seen it one particular way, but this is something I love about doing the interviews, is hearing stories from people who have been here for longer than I have, describing people and places in different ways. It's really nice. Anyway, the sun is going down. It's about to head behind the clouds, which are in behind Salt Spring Island, on this really gorgeous early spring evening. Thanks to Ben McConkey for providing the music at the beginning of this show. Thank you for listening, and until next time.